Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
Last week, Rabbi Schatz and I, when we were like, what do we talk about on this episode? One idea that we sort of very, very briefly toyed with was the idea of like Isurim, of like how you make sense of when bad things happen, when you feel like you're doing things right. And that was last week based on a comment that Rabbi made kind of in passing when Ruth like put her feet in the water that was cold, and Rabbi made a comment of like how only good things come through are acquired through Isurim. Like you have to go through the Isurim through challenges, through struggles in order to get good things on the end, to get a reward, as it were. And that's similar to what Amir's friend at the mikvah is really talking about, with him, really kind of goes into that idea, which is sort of a complicated theodicy, being like how God functions in our lives, and is sort of one rabbinic approach, not the only Talmudic approach, but one Talmudic approach, is sort of this idea that, if bad things are happening to you and you have searched around and you can't figure out anything you did wrong to deserve this, like that's actually a sign that God loves you and is showing God's care about you in making you kind of struggle through this. Now, I would say as relates to Amir, like it's not like Amir is blameless. Like it's not like he's done everything perfect in his relationship. And also the guy at the mikveh, like clearly doesn't know what Amir has done wrong in this relationship. He just sees Amir struggling and is like, don't worry, bro. Like, it's God's love of you. That's like, I say bro because he's like the kind of guy who would say that, and he's like, don't worry. Like, this is God's way of showing he loves you. And that seems to comfort Amir. And in the Talmud, it also similarly kind of seems to be a way that people comfort others of like, oh, it's okay. Like, you're struggling, you're suffering. Like that's, it's called Yisurim Shel Ahava. That's a way that God is showing his like deep care for you.
Well, and it goes even in the Talmud, it goes even deeper in terms of talking about in this world, if something terrible is happening to you or around you, don't worry about it because in the world to come, you'll be even more taken care of, and vice versa. If you're having a great time in this world, then in the world to come, you'll have more challenges. And that, especially when you go down the rabbit hole of someone getting cancer and dying early, or a terrorist attack and people dying, or just any kind of tragedy, right? You all live in New Orleans, right? So if we wanted to just talk, or not all of you, if we wanted to talk about in terms of like natural disasters, right? That could you go with the trope of, in the Talmud it says that if this really bad thing happened to us, we don't have to spend too much time worrying about it because good things will come to us in the world to come. And it's as Rabbi Pernick was mentioning, it's problematic because that's not comforting in any way, shape, or form. You don't go into a shiva home and say, don't worry, I'm so sorry that person died so early. They're going to have it great in the world to come. You would never say that. Oh, right.
Rabbi Yochanan does in the Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan goes to shiva houses with the bone of his 10 sons. And he's like, see, I had 10 sons who died. See,
right. No, but that's what I'm saying. Like, it says that in the Talmud, but we today in the 21st century, I would hope.
You don't.
Fine. You want to say that you would do this? Okay, I'll take all the blame. But I would not go into a shiva home and comfort someone with this kind of lesson.
Yeah, Yuri.
I kind of agree with that because, like, I kind of, like, of the whole thing, the guy I felt, like, most bad for was the guy who was struggling with his sexuality, and the dad actually is supportive. Like, he doesn't, like, directly tell him because he doesn't know yet, but he's still, at the end, when he's talking to his brother, he's like, oh, what are you going to do about it? He's like, well, I'm just going to do what I've always done, just keep it inside. And so, like, I really, like, kind of felt bad because even knowing that, like, his dad would be supportive, he was still too afraid to say anything. So, like, I do think, like, what she's saying is right because, like, how does that how does that comfort you if like if you're too afraid, like if you think that they're going to shun you now, then they're probably going to shun you in the afterlife too.
That's interesting. Like, I mean, I think this idea, right, and I think Roi is an interesting character to think about this particular question about, the Yisurim Shel Ahava and so forth. Like, right, where Roi, it's interesting to think about the moments when Roi is like beginning to think about exploring his sexual orientation, and then when he, like, what are the things that sort of scare him away from it? Right. So, for example, with this guy in the coffee shop, where there clearly seems to be, an attraction. Certainly, the guy's attracted to Roi. It seems like it's maybe mutual. Roi is sort of kind of pursuing it, and then the guy starts benching, and like for Roi, and like being really into it, like he has like really good kavana, like when he's benching, and for Roi, that's like I have to run away from here.
Why?
You say why?
Why is he running away from? Just because of the benching? Or because he can't be gay and Jewish, or what? So
I think there's something about like from gay men that scares Roi, who himself is a from gay man, from meaning religious, but like there's something about, and I think it's there was sort of a similar thing when there was the guy in the dog park a number of episodes back who introduced himself, and like that one. It wasn't the same kind of thing. This one, it was like seeing this guy saying Birkat Hamazon, like, and like clearly.
I mean, so does he. And so
right, exactly. That's the issue.
Wait, say that again.
Fear. That's the fear. They're going to get together. They could get together. They could.
Well, for sure. But I think that what I'm thinking about. There's even a thing in the Talmud about like if you
is it in Bracha?
Really. Maybe I don't actually know where. Maybe probably Bracha. It probably is. That like if you Rabbi Schatz, I think you'll know this and where it's from, even though I can't think of it at the moment. But like if you really have like an unquenchable sexual urge, then you should like go. What I'm talking about? You should like go cover yourself in sackcloth and go to like that, another town and find a prostitute and like.
Oh yeah.
That idea. But I think sort of the whole idea of that is like if like there's no other way and you like really feel like you have no choice but to sleep with someone, like you should go and sort of put on sackcloth and go far away where nobody knows you and it's sort of anonymous and you get it out of your system and then you're come back and you're still, it doesn't change your status socially. Right. I think one of the things that Roi is struggling with is both, right, obviously his sexual orientation, but also like the idea of being with someone who's like also religious makes it more of like a relationship as opposed to like a fling.
It's also more like who he is. And I think it's hard for him to see a mirror of himself in this experience. I think that him seeing this other guy and seeing that he would do things just like Roi would do them, I think he sees this new experience of his life of like, I need to find someone who's different. I need to find someone who is going to both help him through it, but also be different enough that it's separate from his kind of prior identity, even though it's not a prior identity, it's just an identity that now he's finally exploring. So I think the mirrored piece of that is hard for Roi.
Right, but it seems like you're saying that as like a positive thing, whereas to me it seems like it's more of a negative thing. Like when he looks in the mirror, he's like, oh, I can't do this. Whereas like if it was a random guy who he never would see again, it might be different. Right. Like there's like the lack of anonymity, and which you would generally think of as a positive. For him, makes it.
The guy said, you can't run from it forever. Right. You can't run away from this forever. Right. Never.
Right. Yeah.
So he knows, and he said it.
He's also trying to run away from himself a little bit, and so if someone is just like you, that's very hard to do. Okay, right. Renee, and then Denise.
So I think that him seeing that guy in the coffee shop or wherever it was, that what made him uncomfortable was it reminded him of the part of him that is from and what the repercussions of what that means. like that in his circle, he's supposed to follow a different path. And I think that the fact that the guy was religious reminded him of that he can't follow his inclinations. He can't follow his Yetzer Hara, if you will, but he has to follow the correct derech, and the religiousness of that other guy is what reminded him of that.
Exactly.
If it would have been a non-Jew, it wouldn't have, I don't think it would have had that same effect.
I agree. Denise.
So I had the sense also that he's almost ready to take that plunge and explore his sexuality, but integrating it to the rest of his life is a whole other realm. And I think that he's running away from also. And like on Grey's Anatomy, a couple years ago, they started a relationship between two guys.
Yeah.
And one is an Asian American guy and one is a Jewish guy. And the Jewish guy is it's his first relationship, and he hasn't come out to his family, and his partner gets irritated with him.
Mm-hmm.
He's, I worked these things out 10 years ago, and Asian culture also has like a lot of taboos, but he had worked through it. And in the end, the Jewish guy like has all these breakthroughs and whatever. But I felt like Roi's struggle kind of reminded me of that character. Schmidt, I think his name was.
Yeah, it is Schmidt. Yeah. I think that what you're saying is correct. I think that those are stereotypes that are often played off in TV as well. And I think that what often we see in the ways that these kinds of storylines are shown to us in the world of Hollywood is that there is often a desire to be with someone who is not going to remind you of either your past or that which you are struggling with. And so I think all these examples that we're sharing, including Roi and this guy who he met at the cafe, I think does that. And that brings it back to this place of I'm having these struggles. It's hard for me that you've already worked them through. So I need to now find someone else who's different enough from me that those struggles aren't going to be the same. I think that will be a common theme throughout.
I mean, I think it's just interesting to note, also for, given when Srugim aired, which was like 10 years ago, where like this wasn't a topic this was definitely a more taboo topic in the Orthodox world in Israel or in America than today. And so it's sort of interesting to think even 10 years ago, like for someone like a Roi, his approach, I think, would be very normalized out in the world of like, I don't know what to do with this. And like the presence of these sort of like from characters who also seem comfortable in their skin,
mm-hmm.
who he runs into, like that just feels like that was a rare, like Roi would be more of the more common 2010 frum Jew in Israel. These guys who are like frum, but also like just seem to be pretty comfortable going out in the coffee shop and, approaching people. Like, it's sort of, yeah, I don't know. They're like, in some ways, I feel like less realistic characters given that moment, perhaps, in Israeli life. And I think, tying it back to our topic of the Surim Shel Ahava, like that, I think this is similarly one of those challenges where, you think about what the Amir's friend at the mikvah says about, how God is, only gives you the challenges that you can handle and so forth, like, right, which is, I think, similarly a kind of one of those like not helpful like things that people struggling with gender identity and sexual orientation and stuff like are sort of, I think, have been told of like, oh, God gives you what you can handle, or like like it's a test, or things like that, in ways that like you see the way that Roi is struggling with this, and even as his father is saying, indirectly, I would love you even if you came out as gay. The saying about Nazi, like he knows that like there would be some level of social acceptance, and yet or family acceptance at least, and yet he's still not comfortable going there. I mean, yeah, to Norm's point, I think that's, again, this is really a change in the last, I would say, 10 years. I mean, it's not a change, it still exists, but like, I think the normalization of, gender identity, sexual orientation related
acceptance
topics, acceptance to an extent, in the Orthodox world, as well as something that has changed, I think, even from 10 years ago till today, from the time Srugim aired until today. And it's still, very much still not a simple topic. But it's something that has certainly progressed and changed over the last, decade, for sure. Yeah, Norm.
I think that Ruiz said something in an earlier episode suggesting that he thought his father always favored his older brother. And I wonder if his father having said, yes, we would accept him being gay, Ruiz still doesn't know for sure would they accept him being gay.
That's interesting.
Families don't necessarily treat their children the same.
Right, and so even if Nati, who the dad has sort of almost been like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what the story is with Nati, I don't know his deal, whatever, like, almost like willing to write, I'm willing to assume that he's gay and his life trajectory is going to be different than I would have imagined previously. You're right, that doesn't necessarily mean the same applies to Roi, who he doesn't seem to have the same fears about. And maybe if it was Roi, it would be a totally different response.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But to Renee's point, I think that the father does see something in Roi. I think he does know. But to go back to Rabbi Pernick's point, I think that he doesn't know how to approach it with the son who's actually going through it. And so sometimes it takes, I have not lived through this. I do not have siblings who have lived through this. I have very close friends who do have siblings who have lived through this. I know that often the parent will go through kind of the process of processing with a different sibling, which isn't always fair, but with a different sibling, because it's harder to do it with the kid, with the child, the sibling, whatever, who's going through the actual challenge in their own life. So I think that to Renee, to your point, I think that he does know that this is going on with Roi, and he's saying all of these things to Nati, not because he's actually worried about Nati, but because he hopes that Nati can help Roi get through it and make Roi understand that this is the way that he would approach it if Roi could be clear with him that these were the things that he was going through.
I agree. I agree exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
That's what I initially thought. I'm like slightly less sure now.
Because that's what I think, or because you changed your mind?
Probably.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think after Norm's, initially I was like, oh, this is a way of saying to Roi, we'll love you no matter what. But actually, like, maybe that's just not the case. I don't know. We'll have to see as it plays out.
Yeah.
That shock there.
I'm curious to hear if anybody has any thoughts, especially in terms of like the Yifat Amir experience and how we left it in terms of their relationship, whether it has to do with this idea of like living through challenge because it'll get better afterwards, or anything else. Yeah, Karen.
That cake was awesome.
I just want to ask a question. I don't want to address yours.
Yeah.
He dunked 6 times.
Yeah.
Was that like any important thing, or he was just blowing off steam?
Yeah.
I thought it was 3 times usually, that for adoption, and I mean, you know what I'm saying, for conversion.
Yeah. So he was just kind of fervently deciding that if he could do it as many times as possible, then it would wipe him of everything that he was dealing with. There was no significance around how many times he dunked. But when we talk about mikvah ritual, there's different now, especially in the world of like liberal mikvah ritual, not just mikvah ritual around conversion or adoption or nida. that there are many different types of mikvah rituals, mikvah experiences, that you can come up with those different kinds of dunking, like how many times you're going to do it, what blessings you're going to say, what kavanot you might be thinking of, those kinds of things. So it's possible that he had a reason for dunking that many times. I know that for me, this is something very different, but for me, when I go to do a funeral, the number of times that I shovel dirt into the grave, like I have a very specific reason for how many times I do it. So there's no specific number, but I have a very specific reason. It's possible that he did too, but no halachic reason around the 6. And I think it was actually more than 6 because then he did it again. So
what's your reason? Can you say?
I'll tell you. It is not relevant. Like, it's not a secret, but it's not relevant. Renee and then Denise.
I was kind of curious that I know that there are couples when they're going through a rough patch or whatever, that they will consult with their Rav.
Yeah.
And I was kind of curious that it didn't occur to Amir at all to, when he was feeling rejected or whatever he was feeling from Ifat, that neither one of them thought it didn't occur to either one of them
to go to their Rav. Yeah, I'm not sure they know what they would go to their Rav for. I mean, one of the first things that he said to, whatever. One of the first things that Amir said to the guy who keeps showing up at the mikveh, was, I don't really know if I'm even married or not.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's why I thought maybe if he feels some uncertainty in his marriage, and if he feels some uncertainty, that I would have thought that he would have gone to a Rav just to help kind of get clarification, like, how would I know if she's going to leave me? How is this, especially since he's already experienced it, to kind of help him figure out, is this round 2 of the same thing, or am I, reading too much into this?
Yeah, I guess being the rabbi on that side of the table at times, most people come to you like at least knowing what they would ask. I'm just not sure that he would know what he would even ask. Like, I don't think that he has an awareness of what's going on. Like, he doesn't know, is she actually working? I think that there's too much ambiguity right now. You're right that it's interesting, given that this is a show about from Jews, that they didn't consult a rabbi in general. But I do wonder, and I don't actually remember, I do wonder if in the next season we'll see a rabbi's presence a little bit more than right now, when it seems a little bit more unclear as to what you would be asking or wanting consultation around. Denise.
Okay, so to your question about God doesn't give you any suffering you can't handle and all that.
Yeah.
I think there's some truth in that, and I think there's also a danger in that, because let's say God sends a person, a tremendous illness, but it doesn't mean he wants them to sit there and be sick. Maybe the idea is, this is a space for you to grow and think about healing or whatever. And I'm in this chat group. I used to be in a ladies' Parsha class. And when COVID started, it became a WhatsApp chat, basically. And the leader is very into like, oh, we have to be positive and okay. And she posts these things, all the time about like, don't complain and just doesn't matter what bad thing happens, just pray and it'll all be good. But there's someone in the group who I know for a fact has an abusive, drug addicted husband. And I'm like, every time she posts these things, I'm like, oh my God. And I try to like chime in a way that says, hey, maybe God wants you to not be abused or whatever. But like, I don't feel like it's my place to violate this woman's privacy. And I've tried.
My girlfriend calls that toxic positivity.
Sorry?
My girlfriend calls that toxic positivity.
That's a great phrase, because it's exactly that. And I think it's really dangerous for people,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know like when I did a summer hospital chaplaincy, particularly Southern Baptist patients who I had, when I would talk with them and it was like, okay, you're going to have a triple bypass surgery in an hour. Like, how are you feeling? And they'd be like, I'm good. Like, yeah, you're like, are you worried? Like, no, you either worry or you pray. You can't do both, And it's like, okay, you can say that, but like, you're probably worried, And so like often, yeah, Karen, are you going to say something on that? Or
when people are going through tough times, they usually defend against feelings.
Yeah. And so like, that was often a lot of the work. Exactly. Is like, okay, you can say that, but it's not true. Like, I wouldn't say that.
You don't say that.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Right. You don't say that. You say, oh, good to hear.
Yeah.
Let me know
but like then sort of eventually being able to break down that like black and white, because it's like, that's just not it. Like, and I think there's something similar to what, with what Denise is saying of, there are those people who are like, and maybe it's what keeps them going is like, I'm just focused on getting through this and focusing on the positive and whatever, but that's not healthy generally. And like, it's certainly not healthy to try to force that as a norm on everyone, on like other people around you.
Denise, does the person who does just smile through all of it, does she know the other that woman is abused?
No, she doesn't get it. I mean, people
doesn't get it or doesn't know.
Somewhere in between, because I went to meet with her one time, and she like asked a few questions about this person that zeroed in on big issues, which I felt it wasn't my place at all to answer, and I didn't think it was her place to ask me. So given that she had that level of awareness, she might know, and she might have picked something up. I happen to know these people socially for years, and I've seen it sort of devolve, and the wife has opened up to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in a group setting, and then Norm's been waiting for what seems like an hour. So, I think in a group setting, it's often hard even if you know that someone is suffering, whether it's that kind of suffering or any other kind of suffering, to really hit onto that particular person, rather than, I hope that the group leader, if she does know about it, has a relationship with this person, privately, or has somehow counseled her privately, if that's an appropriate thing to do. But I think that when you're talking about a group, like I could know that someone on this call right now is going through something really difficult, and I wouldn't mention it in front of everybody. And I might seem overly positive to that person because they are feeling negative about something, but it's not because I'm deaf to what they are going through. It's more so that I just don't need their experience to be amplified for everybody. So I think that sometimes that kind of deal with the challenge, even if there's other positive things going on around you, is necessary. And you're right that if there's just this trope of everything's going to be fine, you're going to get through it, that's also not helpful, especially in an abusive case where just being positive doesn't get you through it. So that's all I'll say about that. And Karen will talk to her as much as you want her to. Norm.
In terms of consulting a rabbi, I know a lot of them, a lot of you, and there are some for whom I would certainly go when I have a halachic or informational kind of a question to pose. And for the most part, those aren't the same ones who I would go to if I wanted some kind of counseling.
Totally.
In Israel, and to a large extent, vice versa. In Israel, probably, the only one who seems to have much of a personal relationship with a rabbi is the one for whom it's her father, who she wouldn't go to. And most of the other rabbis are civil servants. And while I'm sure some people might have a close personal relationship with them, our crowd of stars don't seem to have a relationship like that with any of their rabbis. Even Amir, when he was going to shul pretty regularly, was taken under the wing of some of the old men who were there, but not apparently the rabbi of the shul.
Right. Yeah. I also think that you are completely correct that our cast of characters doesn't seem to have that relationship. And I would say that, even if I wasn't a rabbi, I don't really have that relationship with rabbis in my life, right? Like that if I need if I need something, there are people in my life that I go to, and some of them happen to be rabbis, but I think that there is a general sense that certain people have. Not everybody has this. I meet with lots of people who do not feel this way, that they don't go to their rabbi for everything, that they have other people that they go to, or they have other ways of finding that information. There are also different rabbis for different things. Like I go to Rabbi Pernick for things that I wouldn't go to someone else, and I don't go to him for other things that I go to other rabbis for. So, and vice versa. So I think that, that's also an important part of this, that maybe Amir's rabbi, whoever that is, we haven't really met his rabbi yet, but whoever his rabbi is might not be the kind of person that he would go to in this kind of case also, which is a really interesting piece of that. Rabbi Barbara, and then Leonard and Rebecca. You just have to unmute. There you
go. To go back to what Rabbi Pernick was saying with regard to, and I find this here in New Orleans a lot because we have a huge Catholic population as well as a huge Baptist population. There's very much a dependence upon God will take care of everything. Mm-hmm. But there's no thought about what happens if God doesn't. And then I see people's faith crushed because the person, their loved one died, or their loved one became sicker. And, I think it's hard to deal with that when someone's in the hospital. And it's not to say, that you shouldn't pray, you should pray. But it doesn't mean just because you've prayed, it's going to turn out the way you want it to pray, the way you want it to be.
Yeah, Leonard and Rebecca.
Even though Amir didn't seek out a rabbi, he did sort of seek out a spiritual answer in that he went to the springs, he went to the mikveh, and he, the same place where he had gone and immersed before his wedding. So he went back to the same place. Fortunately, he met the guy there, or maybe it was all in his mind, the conversation. Maybe it wasn't a literal conversation, but in any case, he was able to, at the end, immerse, and spiritually, he seemed to find some spiritual solace. Whereas Yifat was trying to just immerse herself in work and be busy, and, had a totally different approach to trying to feel better about her marital problems. And when I think about it, the only example I can think of with the women being spiritual or praying was when Hodaya's niece came to visit and ended up telling Hodaya that she went to the Kotel because she wanted to pray, and, she was having a crisis of faith. So that was an example of, a woman can seek prayer and spirituality also.
Or Hodaya go into the graves, right? Like she wanted to be closer to, which is a thing that anybody can do, but a lot of women will do certain graves for certain types of experiences. But yeah, I think Rebecca and Rabbi Barbara, you both said things that are really important to keep in mind, which is prayer, even in 21st century, is something that people both rely on very heavily, and also recognize, like when they've been saying a Misha Berach for a person for a year and that person dies, then they have this question of, well, what was that Misha Berach for, right? So, and not everybody does. I'm just saying there are some people who do. But I think that to Rebecca's point, like Yifat did find spirituality. It just wasn't through the main channels that Amir found it in, like those ritualistic moments. I would say that Yifat went back to also her roots, which was baking a cake, right? From scratch. She made sure that she went through all the steps, because just like Amir went back to that location because that was where he went for his wedding to kind of create that foundational baseline again, she too went back to what was that foundational baseline that I had that created this relationship. I'll go back to that and see if that brings anything back. So I think that both of you said really important things, and lovely that you said them one right after the other, because I think they go hand in hand, that even if that spirituality isn't coming through like the formal channels of Judaism, that it also can show itself in other ways that can be very comforting. But as you said, Barbara, could also be ways in which we feel let down if something doesn't go the way we want it to.
So can you remind me? I don't remember her going to a grave.
She didn't actually. Did she end up going in the end, or did she just talk to the person about going? Do you remember, Rabbi Pernick? I think she went, but maybe I'm just remembering that wrong. She was speaking.
I think she went too. I remember seeing her outside of it.
And then she bought that apartment near one of the, I forget which one now, because it was one I hadn't heard of.
She didn't even know what it was when she bought that apartment.
Right. It was a very obscure in Rehavia, which I live in Rehavia.
Jason's tomb. Yeah, I've been there.
Oh, great. I had never heard of it, but she was talking to someone. I'm sorry that I'm not remembering all the details, but she was talking to someone about kind of the spirituality or the prayer practice of finding a specific kever, a specific tomb or grave site for specific pieces. So like a lot of women will go to like Rachel's tomb for fertility. Other women will go to other tombs for other types of things. But to have kind of those places for that direct connection seems to be something that is very apparent in Jerusalem, but also in kind of that world of from Judaism.
Yeah, Barbara.
So
yes, yeah.
I sort of feel like we got confused because in this episode, Reut's assistant says to her.
Yes, I was an assistant. Thank you. I couldn't remember who it was.
It was Reut's assistant that said to her, right. Well, I went and then I met my
partner.
Right. And and I don't know. I was going to say something else, but it was Reut. But I love that you said that Yifat went back to her roots, which is, as we found out during COVID, is baking.
Yeah.
And, that's it. So it's interesting because she's there. Someone had said this earlier about in the beginning, Yifat takes care of everyone. And now these various people are having things happen in their lives. And so Reut goes to tell Yifat about it. And I even thought that when she was stirring the cake, she might have tears that fell into the cake. Reut, that is. And then Nadi is there, tasting the frosting. It's like something's happening. And they're going back to the places where they feel comfort.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, and with the people who bring them the most comfort.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to close it out, I know Renee has her hand up. Oh, is that Sue Ray has a hand up also?
Okay. I was going to say, and then she told the girl that she was going to have to find another place to live.
Right.
Hodaya. Yeah.
Yeah, she's right. Yeah, that's sort of.
So I think, that was so she could be together with her husband.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think in certain ways we're seeing everyone here, I guess, sort of establish what they need. I mean, obviously, right? And I think, we can add the clown. What's her name?
Daphne
into the mix. Right? That she's right. Like, as much as this is sort of a sad episode, there is a sense of people clarifying what they need. For Reut, who sort of has been putting so much pressure on herself to get married, it's like, you know what? I'm just like getting a grown-up apartment, and like, we'll see what happens with marriage. But like, I'm not going to keep sleeping on a broken bed as a way to force myself to get married. Like, I'm going to get a grown-up place. Yifat's like, I need to set boundaries. Daphna's like, I'm going to date someone who I'm interested in dating. I think even just thinking about, and this goes to one question in the chat that we didn't address, about like Roe and Nati sitting outside their father's wedding. And like, they'll be there for the celebration, but they're just sort of like, no, I don't feel joyful. I'm like, I'm here. I'm outside. Like, I'll go in.
And Davka for the Sheva Brachot, right? That was what we, the audience, heard. Were the first words that we heard when we came onto that scene were Sameach Tesamach, and they were outside. Anyway. Right. So, I know there's all these hands now, and I feel bad. You can take them. I just have to go, but you can take them.
I also sort of have to go, but so sorry, Renee and Leonard and Rebecca. But yeah,
no worries.
Okay. I think it's just, it's interesting. It's like I said, it's sort of a sad end of the episode, but also there's a sense of people beginning to sort of better understand who they are and what they need, and going back to their roots, even if you're going back to the mikvah, of like, I want to sort of get back to where we were before. And I think then we get to see in season 3 in 2 weeks when we're back together where it goes from here.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.